The morning air around the Corpus Christi hospital was cold and strangely still, as if the world itself was holding its breath while doctors fought desperately to save the young woman whose voice had once lit entire stadiums. Inside those frantic rooms, blood-stained sheets and trembling hands painted a reality far removed from the bright stages and glittering costumes the world knew her for, because now it was no longer about fame or music. It was about time, slipping away faster than anyone could catch it. And as crowds gathered outside, crying, praying, begging for a miracle, no one knew that this would be the day the world lost the queen who had only just started to wear her crown. But stories are not built only from their endings, they rise from childhood dreams, relentless work, and the kind of faith that grows in the hearts of ordinary families who refuse to give up. To understand how a girl from Lake Jackson ended up becoming the voice of a generation, we must go back to the beginning, to the small house where music echoed louder than fear, and where a father's belief turned into a legacy the world still cherishes. And as we walk through her life, moment by moment, we discover not just an icon, but a girl who loved deeply, fought quietly, and lived boldly until the very last beat of her heart. Like, share, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Selena Quintanilla was born on April 16, 1971, in a modest home where love was abundant but money was not, and where every day carried both the weight of struggling bills and the warmth of shared meals cooked by hands that believed in better days. Her father, Abraham, had once dreamed of a music career of his own, but life had pushed him away from the spotlight and into the reality of supporting a family, yet he still saw in his youngest daughter a spark he had never seen anywhere else. And in that tiny home filled with laughter, arguments, and the smell of freshly made tortillas, Selena grew surrounded by melodies she couldn't yet name but already understood deep in her bones. From the time she could speak, she could also sing, and her siblings, Suzette on drums and AB on bass, became both her playmates and her first bandmates in a partnership that would shape all their futures. They didn't have polished instruments or expensive equipment, but what they lacked in resources they made up for in relentless practice sessions in a cramped garage that shook with rhythms neighbors often complained about. And as Selena's voice grew stronger, clearer, and far beyond her age, her father realized he wasn't raising just a daughter with talent, he was witnessing the rise of a star destined to change music forever. But childhood for Selena was not all applause and lights, it was also filled with sacrifices no young girl should have to face, including lost weekends, missed birthday parties, and long drives to small-town gigs where the pay was barely enough to keep the family afloat. She learned early that dreams demanded more than desire, they demanded perseverance, even when exhaustion pulled at her eyes and fear whispered that maybe she wasn't ready. And yet she always rose, always smiled, always walked onto makeshift stages with the innocent courage of a girl who didn't yet know the world would one day call her a legend. Selena's true spark didn't erupt in a single dramatic moment, but rather in the quiet, consistent glow of watching audiences transform whenever she opened her mouth to sing, because for her music wasn't performance, it was connection. She wasn't fluent in Spanish at first, yet her father insisted she learn to sing in it, believing that Tejano music needed her voice even if the culture didn't accept a young girl leading a genre dominated by men. And although she stumbled over pronunciations and faced critics who said a girl like her didn't belong on those stages, Selena pushed forward, determined to honor the music that shaped her family. Her early performances with Selena y Los Dinos were far from glamorous, often taking place in dusty fairs, brightly lit quinceañeras, and smoky bars where some people walked out simply because they couldn't imagine a young girl carrying the weight of Tejano music. But every night, she stood her ground with a voice that carried more emotion than many adults twice her age, and with a charm so natural it softened even the harshest skeptics. And slowly, show by show, she began to not only win audiences over, she began to win their hearts, carving a space for herself where no one thought space existed. Yet behind the applause was the pressure of survival, because the Quintanilla family depended on their music financially, and every performance was a gamble between hope and necessity. Selena felt this burden even as a child, pushing herself to be perfect so that her family could breathe a little easier, eat a little better, sleep with fewer worries. And through it all, her love for music never dimmed. Instead, it burned brighter, transforming each hardship into fuel for a dream she was only beginning to understand. As the years passed, Selena's popularity began to rise, but the journey toward fame came with an unforgiving toll, because success in Tejano music was never handed to anyone, especially not a young woman. She faced constant criticism for her costumes, her stage presence, and her boldness, with some calling her too provocative and others insisting she should stay behind the scenes, yet Selena never allowed those voices to define her or shrink her confidence. And every time she felt the sting of those judgments, she turned it into energy, returning to the stage with even more fire and resilience. Her family's financial struggles continued to shadow their progress, forcing them to perform relentlessly, sometimes traveling through the night in old vans that broke down more often than they ran. There were nights when they sang for crowds so small it felt like failure, and mornings when they woke unsure if they'd make enough money to reach the next show. But through exhaustion, hunger, and the weight of expectation, Selena never lost her joy, greeting each new performance with gratitude, because she understood that every opportunity, no matter how small, was another chance to grow. Behind the scenes, she also battled the loneliness that came with always being on the road, missing out on friendships and a normal teenage life, because her world revolved around rehearsals, studios, and stages that demanded everything she had. She studied between shows, completed high school through a correspondence program, and smiled during interviews as though the world wasn't asking too much of her too soon. And through it all, she leaned on her faith, her family, and her own relentless hope that one day her sacrifices would mean something greater than the pain they cost her. Selena's breakthrough came like a storm that had been gathering strength for years, powerful and unstoppable, beginning when she won Female Vocalist of the Year at the Tejano Music Awards, an honor she would hold for nearly a decade. That moment placed her at the center of a genre that had never seen anyone like her, a young woman who blended traditional Tejano with pop, cumbia, and her own infectious charisma that brought new life to the music. And suddenly, the girl who had once been dismissed became the very force driving Tejano into the mainstream, proving that talent has no limits when matched with heart. Her album, Ven Conmigo, made history, followed by Entre a mi mundo, which catapulted her into international recognition, and soon she was headlining shows with thousands singing every word she poured into the microphone. But nothing matched the moment she released Amor, Prohibido, and later, Como la Flor, songs that didn't just make fans dance, they made them feel seen, understood, and connected to a story larger than themselves. And with every award, every sold-out concert, every magazine cover, Selena's confidence grew, not out of ego but out of gratitude, because she knew how far she had come and how hard she had fought to get there. Yet the true highlight of her breakthrough was meeting and marrying Chris Perez, the quiet, talented guitarist who saw her not as a star but as a woman with dreams, fears, and a heart big enough to hold the world. Their love was gentle but fierce, built in the shadows of public scrutiny and family concerns, yet it blossomed into a marriage that grounded Selena during her busiest years. And as her fame continued to climb, Chris became her anchor, reminding her that beneath the glitter, applause, and international success, she was still the same girl from Lake Jackson with a dream worth protecting. But every life, no matter how bright, faces a moment when the light begins to tremble, and for Selena, that moment came in the form of a woman she had trusted, a woman named Yolanda Saldivar. Yolanda was the president of Selena's fan club and later the manager of her boutiques, a position that gave her access to Selena's business, finances, and personal life, but behind her soft voice and unwavering loyalty hid obsession and dangerous possessiveness. And as irregularities in accounts surfaced and staff complaints piled up, Selena and her family began to see the truth, that Yolanda was not a friend, but a threat. When confronted, Yolanda broke into tears, begging for forgiveness, insisting everything was a misunderstanding, and Selena, with her compassionate heart, struggled to accept that someone she trusted could betray her so deeply. She wanted to believe in second chances, in redemption, in the goodness of people, because that was who she was, someone who always led with love. But love can be blinding, and Selena stepped into the Days Inn motel room on March 31, 1995, hoping for closure, unaware that she was walking into the final and darkest chapter of her life. What happened next shook the world: an argument, a gunshot, a staggering run for help, and the collapse of a queen whose voice had barely begun to echo across nations. In those final moments, she fought with everything she had, leaving behind a trail of blood and a whispered name of the woman who betrayed her. And as the news spread, millions cried, unable to believe that a life so full of promise, love, and music could be taken by the hands of someone she had once trusted with her dreams. Selena's death was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her immortality, because legends are not defined by their final days but by the echoes they leave behind. Her posthumous album, Dreaming of You, broke records across the globe, proving that even in silence, she could outsing entire generations with the purity of her voice and the power of her spirit. And her foundation, built by her family, continued her mission of helping children and young people chase dreams she never got to fully fulfill. Around the world, murals rose in her honor, streets were named after her, movies were made about her life, and young girls who looked like her finally saw a reflection of themselves on stages they once believed were out of reach. Selena didn't just change Tejano music, she opened doors for Latina artists everywhere, making space for stories that had long been ignored, and inspiring people to embrace their culture with pride instead of fear. And today, her songs still play at parties, weddings, festivals, and long road trips, allowing each new generation to fall in love with her all over again. Selena's legacy is not a tale of tragedy but of triumph, because she lived with courage, loved without limits, and gave the world a beauty that even death could not silence. Her story reminds us that life, no matter how short, can be filled with purpose if we dare to dream beyond our circumstances. And as her voice continues to echo through decades, she remains exactly who she always was, a bright, unstoppable force of joy, the queen who was gone too soon, but never forgotten. Like, share, and subscribe.